start the webinar. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. We will get started in just a few minutes. My name is Beth Allen, and I am the Communications Director here at CWA. We will be waiting for some folks to join. We've got a huge number of people signed up tonight, so I want to give people a chance to get on before we start our program. So just hang with us for a couple of minutes and we'll get started soon. The chat is open, so please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what local you're from, or if you're not from CWA, what union or other organization you're here from. We'd love to have our members, our retirees, and our allies here tonight. If you have any questions, we will have some time for questions at the end. So please use the Q&A function to submit your questions. We won't be able to monitor the chat for questions, but if you use the Q&A function for any questions that are relevant to our discussion tonight, we will keep an eye on those and hopefully be able to answer your questions when we finish with our remarks. I see some retirees here. I see some staff. I see a bunch of folks from District 4, a friend from UAW. This is great. Thank you all for being here and for introducing yourselves. I see several members of our executive board have joined us tonight. Thank you so much for being here. This is great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. So people are still joining, so I want to give it just another minute before we get started. Make sure nobody misses program tonight. Still got people coming in. All right, I think that we can get started again. Again, thank you all for being here. My name is Beth Allen. I'm the Communications Director for CWA. We'll be taking questions later, so please use the Q&A function if you have any questions for one of our speakers here tonight. Tonight's town hall is about the attacks that have been coming from the new administration over our contracts and our rights. Tonight we'll be hearing from CWA Local 3204 President Ed Barlow, Economic Policy Institute Senior Fellow Lynn Reinhardt, and CWA President Claude Cummings Jr. You know, every day brings more news about attacks that have been coming from the new administration. And they're attacking federal workers, firing federal workers, and trying to shut down the agencies that provide critical services. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on the actions that directly affect our collective bargaining and organizing rights. We'll be holding some more town halls in the coming weeks to cover other topics, like the impact of President Trump's budget proposals and tax plans on our healthcare and threats to programs like Social Security and Medicare. I have a presentation I'm going to start up. So these are some of the topics we're going to be covering tonight. The headlines we've been seeing are alarming. We've been seeing information about how President Trump has illegally fired members of the National Labor Relations Board. enabling billionaire backers like Jeff Bezos to take their union busting to a new level. He's shut down the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, which we have turned to facilitate voluntary union recognition and for assistance when bargaining stalls. And most recently, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem canceled the TSA Officers collective bargaining agreement, putting our members who work in airports at risk and signaling to employers that they can ignore labor law. Our first speaker tonight, CWA Local 3204 President Ed Barlow, is going to talk about the important role the NLRB played in last year's successful strike at AT&T Southeast. Let me just stop sharing, and Ed, please take it away.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening, brothers and sisters. I'm Ed Barlow, and I'm the president of CWA Local 3204 here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm so glad to be with you all this evening. As most of you probably know, my local and CWA members who work at AT&T across the Southeast went on strike last August over unfair labor practices committed by AT&T. There were 17,000 members, including technicians, customer service representatives, and others who install, maintain, and support AT&T's network throughout our district. The reason we went on strike was because AT&T was simply not bargaining in good faith, period. The company was engaged in surface bargaining, not sending people with real decision-making authority to the bargaining table, refusing to bargain over mandatory subjects of bargaining, you name it, they did it. So we had no choice but to go on strike. I'm glad to say that after we were out on strike for a full month, we forced AT&T to bargain in good faith, and we ultimately secured a good contract that included significant wage increases and protected our health care. That was thanks to the strong unity from all our members and, of course, the strong solidarity shown from our whole union. But it was also thanks to the National Labor Relations Board. The reality is that without the NLRB, we would have had no recourse when AT&T failed to come to the table in good faith. The NLRB enforces the rules that enable us to protect ourselves against companies' unfair labor practices. It also ensures our right to strike without retaliation. Workers on an unfair labor practice strike cannot be fired or permanently replaced. We are entitled to have our jobs back once the strike is over. So I'm really concerned that Trump administration has not only moved to weakening many of NLRB's rules protecting our rights, they've also tried to stop the NLRB from being able to do its job altogether. So I'm really concerned. If these efforts succeed, we won't be able to fully enforce the protections in our contracts. And it will become even harder to get the fair contracts that provide us with pay, benefits, and decent working conditions that we all deserve. So we need to all stand united and stay focused on protecting our rights as people who work hard for a living and who care about each other in our communities. Anti-union politicians who just look out for their CEO and millionaire friends are illegally canceling union contracts because they won't be any consequences. We didn't stay silent last year when AT&T tried to push us around at the bargaining table. Like generations of CWA members before us, we made the sacrifices necessary to go on strike because our future is worth fighting for. We cannot remain silent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate your remarks. And thank you all for the sacrifices you made when you went on strike last year.
Thank you.
I want to take a few minutes to give a brief overview of the role the NLRB and other agencies play in protecting our contracts and our rights. I'm going to get the presentation started back up here. So the National Labor Relations Act is the law that covers most private sector workers. We depend on the NLRB to make companies comply with the law. Under the NLRA, workers have the right to organize and join unions, to collectively bargain contracts, and to take collective action to improve working conditions, whether or not they belong to a union. To preserve and protect these rights, the NLRB conducts elections and holds companies accountable when they commit unfair labor practices. It also ensures that companies recognize the union, bargain in good faith, respond to information requests, and that they don't modify the terms and conditions of our employment without bargaining over the changes. Workers in the transportation industry, like our flight attendants and passenger service agents, are covered by a different law called the Railway Labor Act, which is enforced by the National Mediation Board. Public sector workers are excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, but federal workers have the right to collectively bargain, and some states and localities allow collective bargaining for public workers. There are other laws that protect our rights, and I've listed some of them here. These are enforced by the Department of Labor, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the courts. One last agency that I mentioned at the start of this call is the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. This agency does a lot of things to help facilitate bargaining, including providing training to bargaining committees and stepping in to help when bargaining gets stuck. Staff from the agency have also been able to be the neutral third party who determines whether or not a majority of workers have signed union cards when an employer has agreed to voluntarily recognize a union. I know that was a lot of information, and I went through it a little bit quickly, but we'll be sharing these slides in a follow-up email that we'll send you tomorrow. Now I'm going to hand it off to our next speaker, Lynn Reinhardt. Lynn is a senior fellow at the Economic Policy Institute who has spent her career using her legal expertise to fight for workers' rights to form unions and engage in collective bargaining. During the Biden administration, she served as a senior counselor to the Secretary of Labor and the acting Secretary of Labor, and prior to that, she was the general counsel at the AFL-CIO. Lynn's an expert on the role the National Labor Relations Board plays in enforcing the National Labor Relations Act and how corporate CEOs and the anti-worker politicians they support have weakened the NLRA over time. She's here tonight to share her insights on the latest attacks on our rights. Lynn?
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, CWA, for inviting me to join you for this town hall on this incredibly important topic. As Beth said, I'm a senior fellow at the Economic Policy Institute, which is a think tank based in Washington, D.C. that does research and studies and writes reports on economic issues as they affect working people in this country, working people generally. And over the years, EPI has spent a fair amount of time looking at the National Labor Relations Board and how it has functioned under various administrations. So I'm happy to be able to spend a few minutes with you this evening talking about what's going on with respect to the National Labor Relations Board these days. I wish I had happier news to report, but at least you'll get the news and have that information to move forward with. So really, as the prior speakers have already sort of alluded to, we are faced with a just unprecedented level and type of attack on the National Labor Relations Board and on workers' rights that are protected by the National Labor Relations Board and the National Labor Relations Act. As Beth said, I've spent my whole career fighting for workers' rights and these rights, and I've never seen anything like it. I hope we never see anything like this again. For starters, as has been mentioned, about a week into his administration, President Trump took the unprecedented act of firing a sitting Senate-confirmed member of the National Labor Relations Board from her position on the board. He fired Gwen Wilcox, who happens to be the first and only Black woman who has ever served on the National Labor Relations Board. He fired her from her job without cause. And the same day, in the same email, he fired NLRB General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo, who you all know very well because she came to the NLRB from CWA, where she was a special counsel working with all of you on organizing campaigns and other issues. Jennifer was a spectacular general counsel at the NLRB. She vigorously and strongly enforced workers' rights and held employers accountable. She really was a force to be reckoned with and did an amazing job. That said, it was not a shock that President Trump fired Jennifer Abruzzo because, as you'll remember, on his first day in office, President Biden fired Trump's general counsel at the NLRB, Peter Robb. So it was kind of expected that Trump would probably do the same thing with respect to Jennifer Abruzzo. But firing Gwen Wilcox was absolutely unprecedented. It has never happened in the 90-year history of this law. And there's a reason why it hasn't happened. The reason is that there's language in the National Labor Relations Act that says NLRB members cannot be removed except for neglect of duty and malfeasance. And that's after you give charges and have a hearing. It's kind of like the just cause protection that you all bargain for and enforce in the collective bargaining agreements that you have with your members or for your members. NLRB members have this just cause protection, and that is why no president has ever tried to just summarily fire a member of the NLRB. But President Trump did so with respect to Gwen Wilcox because he thinks that that language limiting his power to fire people is unconstitutional. And he wants to test his theory and get this up to the Supreme Court and hope that this Supreme Court, which includes 3 justices that President Trump himself appointed in his first term, he's hoping this Supreme Court will reverse 90 years of legal precedent and give him the power to fire the heads of independent agencies like the National Labor Relations Board. And I want to just pause here and say that while the potential consequences of that action for the National Labor Relations Board and for workers' rights under the National Labor Relations Board are extremely serious, it's not just about the NLRB. This is also about the EEOC that protects workers from discrimination. This is about the Federal Trade Commission. This is about the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is about the President of the United States wanting to take power over independent agencies that were set up by Congress to hold employers accountable for things that hurt workers, that hurt consumers. And the way these agencies are set up very deliberately by Congress is that you have independent, basically judges at these agencies that adjudicate cases, and they decide whether or not an employer violated the law. And the way the system has worked is that the judges at these agencies, like Gwen Wilcox, adjudicate whether a company has violated the law. It's about whether or not the law was broken, not whether or not Donald Trump thinks the employer should be held accountable. So this case, to back up just a little bit, Gwen Wilcox did not take this sitting down. She filed a lawsuit saying that the president had illegally fired her. And 2 weeks ago, a federal district court judge agreed with her. Gwen Wilcox is back at work. Happily, what that means is that the National Labor Relations Board once again has a quorum. The NLRB needs 3 people in order to issue decisions and take actions. And when President Trump fired Gwen Wilcox, he took the NLRB down to 2 people. So it rendered it, basically, it disabled the National Labor Relations Board. And employers caught on to that real fast. You probably saw that workers at a Whole Foods store in Philadelphia voted to unionize, and Whole Foods said, you know what? I don't think you can certify that election because you don't have a quorum. Well, now we do. Now we do. So Whole Foods is going to have to get serious about their obligations under the law now that we have Gwen Wilcox back in her job. But it was very serious there. He really literally disabled an agency from operating by firing Gwen Wilcox. And I can't help but say that he fired the first Black woman ever to serve on the board and left 2 white men there to keep the lights on while this was all underway. So my point is that, so Gwen filed her lawsuit. She won in the district court. The government has appealed that case. The case is now pending in the Court of Appeals. It is clear as day that what the president wants is he's deliberately set up this case and cases involving these other agencies because he wants to get this case to the Supreme Court and get the Supreme Court to change the law to give him the power to fire the heads of these agencies. And if he succeeds, and I would like to sit here tonight and tell you that he's not going to succeed because his arguments are ridiculous and should be laughed out of court. I would like to say that, but I can't in good conscience say that. there's a risk here. There's a real risk that that the court will give him the authority that he's looking for. And if they do, the truth is that is the end of independent agencies as we know them, because they won't be independent anymore. They'll be serving at the pleasure of the president. This is a president who joked with Elon Musk about Elon Musk firing strikers. He thought that was great and really funny. And he wants to be able to fire any member of the NLRB for anything. So imagine a member of the NLRB. Are they going to stand up for strikers' rights if President Trump gets his way and gets the law changed to give him this power? I think we all know the answer to that question. So it's pretty scary stuff. And it's going to wend its way through the courts and end up in the Supreme Court sometime in the coming months. But in the meantime, for now, we have a functioning NLRB. We have a quorum. We actually have a Democratic majority on the NLRB for right now. The board is 2-1 Democrats, 2 union lawyers, former union lawyers, and 1 Republican, and 2 vacancies. So that's what it is for now. We expect the president to make nominations to fill those 2 vacancies sometime in the pretty near future. Once he is able to put nominations forward and the Senate confirms those nominees, presumably the board will have a 3-2 Republican Democrat split on the board. So that's a functioning board. Unfortunately, if the past is any indication, that's also pretty worrisome, because if you look back at what happened in President Trump's first presidency, his National Labor Relations Board, the appointees he put on the board were all management lawyers who took actions and made decisions that weakened workers' rights and gave more power to employers. And we all know the last thing we need under this already weak law is an agency that's giving more power to employers, but that's what happened. And we did at EPI a report that looked at what the Trump NLRB was up to, and we found that the Chamber of Commerce was 10 for 10 on their wish list of what they were looking for out of the Trump board in terms of weakening workers' rights and giving more power to employers. So it's worrisome. We're very concerned about what's going to happen once this president gets his majority on the National Labor Relations Board. But for now, there is a Democratic majority on the board. Jennifer Abruzzo is gone. The president has named an acting general counsel to take her place. That acting general counsel has withdrawn most of Jennifer Abruzzo's memos, and those memos basically lay out her priorities and her approach to interpreting and enforcing the law. So that's all gone. And let's be real, whoever comes in next as general counsel is going to be no Jennifer Abruzzo. And there are real worries about the sort of priorities that the next general counsel will take in enforcing the law. But for now, we have a quorum, we have a board, and I want to stop with this, which is that we still have 26 NLRB regions full of hardworking employees, federal employees, who are there because they believe in the mission of the agency and they believe in this law, which was set up by Congress to protect and enforce workers' rights to have unions and engage in collective bargaining. So the law is still there. The agencies are still there. The regional offices are still there. They're still running elections. They're still investigating unfair labor practice charges. And those federal employees are having a really tough time right now, but they're still doing their job. So I think it's on all of us to both honor the fact that they're continuing to do really important work and to continue to utilize the NLRB, especially in the regions, while we have a functioning NLRB. So that's the state of play. I wish I had happier news to report, but this is the world that we find ourselves in. Thanks again for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Lynn. That was really great, and I appreciate the information you shared with us. I think that our members in AT&T Southeast will remember that President Trump and Elon Musk made those jokes about firing striking workers while they were on their month-long strike last summer. So it was, insult to injury, making that kind of joke at the time when our members were making those kinds of sacrifices. So thank you again. Now I'm pleased to introduce CWA President Claude Cummings Jr. He's going to join us to talk about how we've been fighting back against these attacks. President Cummings.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and to Ed and Beth as well for your insightful presentations. Good evening, members. To be honest with all of you, I am surprised, just really surprised that that this has happened so quickly. I expected when Project 2025 was initially introduced that that we would have some issues with it, but to be honest, I'm worried, and I'm worried as I can be. The people who are now controlling the federal government told us exactly what they planned to do when they publicized Project 2025. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, as I said earlier, and with such complete disregard for the impact on millions of American workers. And I'm worried that not enough CWA members understand what is going on. I hope that after this call ends tonight, you will all help get the word out. Listen, it is so sombering to think about the threats to our rights happening right now as a result of the attacks on the NLRB. But even worse, as we gather here tonight, our rights as workers are being threatened on multiple fronts. It may not seem like the mass firing of fellow workers has anything to do with CWA members or our contracts, but it does. It does. What Donald Trump and Elon Musk are communicating with their actions is that any boss should be able to fire any worker for any reason or no reason at all. They are saying that union contracts can just be ignored. They are saying that experience and competence don't matter. What matters is that workers are loyal to the boss. If they had the chance, I'm confident that a lot of our employers would tear up our contracts. And if we don't stand up to the CEOs and billionaires who brought Donald Trump and the MAGA leadership into Congress to power, if they succeed in eliminating the National Labor Relations Board and all of the other agencies that enforce our labor laws, that's where we will end up. It's almost unimaginable, but it could happen unless we use every tool we have to fight to protect our freedom to join unions and to bargain contracts. And that's what we are going to do. We are fighting in the courts. We join with other unions to try to stop Elon Musk Doge from getting access to our members and retirees' personal confidential information, including complaints against employers filed at the Department of Labor. We join with the American Federation of Government Employees to try to prevent Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, from canceling the TSA Officers contract. Not only is that an illegal violation of their right to collective bargain, the chaos and disruption will cause problems with AFA and our AFA CWA members who work at airports and on airplanes. It will cause them to be at risk. We're making sure our elected officials know that the attacks on our union rights is not okay. I encourage you to send emails, to call, and to show up at town halls and at local offices to make your voice heard. It doesn't matter if you're a member of Congress, is a Democrat or Republican. They all need to hear from us. Parties don't matter. What matters is whether or not they are going to protect the fundamental right every worker should have, the right to stand up for ourselves at work without fear of retaliation, and the right to improve our standard of living by bargaining a union contract. Simple as that. Too many politicians on both sides of the aisle have become dependent on money from corporations and billionaires to stay in power. We need to use our votes to remind them that they work for us. The midterm congressional elections are not until 2016, but there are other elections going on right now. In a couple of weeks, voters in Wisconsin will be electing a state Supreme Court justice. This is a nonpartisan race. Elon Musk has spent millions to defeat Susan Crawford, a former prosecutor and judge who has stood up for collective bargaining rights of hundreds of thousands of public sector workers in Wisconsin. Join us next Thursday to call pro-worker voters in Wisconsin to urge them to vote for Susan Crawford in this important election. You know, I've always believed that we need to compete with candidates in every congressional district in every state who will put working people and retirees first. People often write off whole parts of the country, like the South. But as Ed reminded us earlier, the South is where 17,000 CWA members went on strike for over a month. We saw tremendous community support for our strikers. People want to end the corporate control of their lives. When they see us standing up for ourselves, it gives them hope that there is an alternative. That's why continuing to mobilize for strong contracts is such an important part of maintaining our right to collective bargaining. The more we fight, the more we push back against corporate greed. The more elected leaders see that we have the public on our side. Right now, we still have News Guild CWA members on strike at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the longest running active strike in the country. Almost 10,000 CWA members are bargaining at AT&T Southwest. In the airline industry, AFA-CWA flight attendants continue their long battle for a fair contract at United. And passenger services agents at Piedmont Airlines are fighting for fair wages and the respect they deserve. Our IUE CWA members at GE Aerospace have kicked off their contract campaign in advance of bargaining later this year. CWA healthcare workers at Calata and Catholic Healthcare Systems in upstate New York are at the table fighting for a good contract and safe staffing levels that will allow them to provide their patients with the care they deserve. These are just some of the many CWA members across the country who are currently in bargaining or will be soon. If you are bargaining, make sure your friends and neighbors know about it. Turn out to support other CWA members and members of other unions for rallies and on picket lines. Help workers organize to join CWA. With the changes to the NLRB, organizing is going to be more difficult. There's no doubt about that. It will be much easier for companies to delay the process and run their union busting playbook. The Trump administration has opened the door for them to attack and make it clear that they will have the union busters' backs, not ours. But CWA has always taken a creative approach to organizing, even in the most difficult of environments. We help workers make their stories known publicly to their communities and to shareholders so that companies engaged in union busting feel real consequences, even without pro-worker leaders at the NLRB and the other agencies that protect our rights. We even know how to help workers build power to improve their quality of life, even in situations where they do not have formal recognition by the employer. We have done it for decades in Texas with the Texas State Employees Union, CWA Local 6186. We have done it at higher education institutions in over a dozen states. We have done it at Google, one of the biggest corporations in the world. We put together a toolkit with information on how you can get involved and flyers you can share with your coworkers and others in your community. The link is in the chat, and we will send it out tomorrow to everyone who registered for this call. Please take a look at it and use it to put other CWA members and retirees and get them involved in this fight. Listen, times are tough right now. Prices are still too high, and layoffs are on the rise. These are serious issues, and the president seems to be more focused on punishing his political opponents than finding solutions that help working families make ends meet. We cannot solve these problems unless we work together, no matter who we voted for in the last election. Every CWA member and retiree deserves respect, and our union will protect and fight for all of us. I'm not giving up, and if you're on this call tonight, you're not giving up either. Ed talked about the sacrifices that our members at AT&T Southeast made to go on strike. The history of our union is filled with stories of people who made sacrifices because they believed in the promise of a better tomorrow. They did not give up. They did not back down. We will not give up. We will not back down. Thank all of you for being here tonight. And I think we have a few moments to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claude. I really appreciate your remarks. We do have a few minutes for questions, and we have a couple of questions. The first one, I think, is for Lynn, which is that with Glenn Wilcox back on the board and Trump likely to appoint his own board members, does that mean that even though the NLRB isn't on our side, that it'll at least be there and be safe?
That's a great question. Kudos to whoever asked it. My own personal view on this is that even though the NLRB can be very frustrating and can do some really terrible things, that we are still better off having a National Labor Relations Board than not. Because most of the work of the National Labor Relations Board is done in the regions. That's where elections are run. That's where unfair labor practices are investigated. That's where settlements are reached about unfair labor practices. That's where the regions try to get workers back to work with an injunction proceeding if they were illegally fired for union activity. So I'm very worried about the direction of the big cases that the board is going to decide once President Trump has his majority on the National Labor Relations Board. I'm very worried about that. It's going to make life harder in the world of organizing and collective bargaining. But for kind of run-of-the-mill cases that are investigated and run by the good, hardworking people in the regions of the NLRB. I think that there's still a lot to be gained from that, and that that we're gonna need the agency as we go forward. Here. And I hope, if I can kind of veer off a tiny bit from the question, to say one other thing, which is I'm also very hopeful that these attacks on the very constitutionality of the NLRB that are being brought by people like Elon Musk, no kidding, in his SpaceX case, and by Jeff Bezos, no kidding, in Amazon, and dozens of other employers have joined in. And they're basically saying that the structure of the NLRB is unconstitutional, so therefore it should not be allowed to function. So far, all of those challenges have lost, except in Texas. And there's still cases, working their way through the courts in Texas and the Fifth Circuit, which covers Texas. So this is another thing that is probably going to go up to the Supreme Court, and we're going to see what this Supreme Court has to say about the constitutionality of the NLRB. But in the meantime, we have an agency with thousands of employees who are out there to try to enforce your members' rights. And I think that's to the good.
Great. Thanks so much, Lynn. We have another question about striking. I think President Cummings, maybe you can take this one, which is that with the change in administration, are we going to be less likely to go on strike? I think you're on mute, President Cummings.
Okay, I thought I was unmuted. No, we will strike if we need to. Simple as that. We have District 6 who's bargaining with AT&T right now. We have other units, of course, that are bargaining. If there's a need to strike, we'll strike. I think I showed last year that I'm not afraid to strike any unit if we need to. I'm the first president to strike AT&T or announce a strike against AT&T in over 25 years. And we will do it again, if we need to.
Great, thank you. We've had a couple of questions that maybe you can address, Lynn, which is people are worried about the attacks on the judiciary and Trump's willingness to just ignore judicial orders. What recourse is there if he continues to do that? Is there any way to enforce a judicial order?
This is the million-dollar question. The courts, and let's remember that the federal courts are right now there are a lot of judges appointed by Donald Trump on the federal courts. So, it's a very mixed bag in the federal courts as to which judge is hearing a case, what the judge is saying, how these cases are coming out. But there are a lot of Trump judges, there are a lot of Biden judges, there are still a good number of Obama judges and some others left. This question of what do you do if the president actually refuses to comply with a court order it's a very hard one, and legal experts are really struggling to lay out exactly what the roadmap would be to force compliance with a judicial order. And so, I mean, the truth is we're kind of in untested grounds here. And so I don't have an answer to the question. I share the concern, and I'm sure many of us on this call were completely horrified when we heard the White House spokesperson say that basically their view was they didn't have to comply with an order of a judge because it was only made verbally, not in writing, so that they didn't really need to turn the planes around. That kind of statement and action is extremely worrisome. So I don't have a good answer, but a lot of people are looking at it because we know that this test is coming. I mean, it's actually here. It's actually here.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Another question that you may know the answer to is this member says they work for a public entity, the California State Courts. Are there efforts to bust unions at the state level by the Trump administration? And can state legislatures and governors run interference on that?
Yes and yes. If you go back to the Trump administration's playbook, the Project 2025 treatise, that makes very clear that Project 2025 doesn't think that there's a place in the world for public sector unions at the federal, state, or local level. And already legislation's been introduced to abolish unions at the federal level. A state, and I'm really sorry, but I'm going to forget which one, I think it might have been Utah, made public sector unions illegal within the last month. And so by all means, there are efforts underway by anti-union politicians to try to roll back collective bargaining rights for public sector workers at the state and local levels. So worker rights supporters can absolutely push back on that. And I think this would be a good time for them to be voicing their support for collective bargaining in the public sector and all of the goods and stability and good things, good outcomes that happen when there is a collective bargaining agreement in place in the public sector. Yes, we need pro-worker elected officials to be speaking out and pushing back because the attacks are here.
Thank you, Lynn. We have time for one last question, and President Cummings, I'm going to hand it to you to answer it, and then maybe you can wrap us up. We'll take two questions and kind of put them together. One was from a retiree who says that their local retiree chapter isn't active and is wondering how they can stand up and protest and get involved. And then the other is whether or not we are coordinating with the AFL-CIO and other unions on escalating our actions and doing national action if necessary.
Well, we certainly have. We have entered into lawsuits with several other unions on the attacks that are taking place in the administration. We have a lot of activities that are taking place. Of course, we've been involved in rallies. There are rallies taking place across the country. And my suggestion would be we'll continue to send out information on where rallies and other activities are taking place, and we'll make sure that the retirees clubs have that information, so you can participate if you would like to.
Thank you so much, President Cummings. And thanks to everyone who participated in the call tonight, all of our guests who spoke, all of you who attended and engaged in the chat and asked questions. Like I said, we'll be sending a follow-up email with some of the information we discussed tonight and our toolkit. Most of you are probably already on our email list, but if not, there'll be instructions there how to join our national email list to make sure that you get notifications of actions that are taking place. Please connect with your locals. Please connect with your districts to stay informed and stay engaged. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you all later.
All right.
Bye-bye.